Hello, everyone. This is Solomon Wilcots, and welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast presented by FanDuel. And of course, we're joined by Cincinnati Bengals insider Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, it's not a happy week for Bengals fans. There's no doubt, because the Cincinnati Bengals have now been eliminated from playoff contention after being shut out at home at Paycor Stadium by a Baltimore Ravens team, by the way, who they just beat handedly on Thanksgiving night. So first, just kind of take me through this embarrassment of a shutout at home, right? It breaks a streak of 114 consecutive games since the Bengals were last shut out. And you know they were shut out by the Baltimore Ravens in the season opener to kick off the 2017 season. So how does that resonate? How does that sit with you? And what can we take away from it all?
It's weird to say about a team that scored no points, but they had real opportunities. There were, I believe, 5 chances for real game-changing deep completions in the first half that would have given the Bengals the lead at the time. There were at least a handful of drops. There were plays that Burrow would tell you he just missed. And then as the game went on, the Ravens' pressure plan, and combined with some ineffective play on the offensive line by the Bengals, created one opportunity after another for the Ravens to be the team that created the splash plays. It was just poor execution. And it starts with Burrow, who after the game put the game on himself.
Yeah, look, he certainly could have played better. It was one of these games where I thought it was a myriad of things, because they certainly had opportunities. They certainly could have scored more points on offense than being just shut out. I do think weather played a role in this, but the other team had to play in it too. But I think you saw early interceptions for both quarterbacks, and I think it had something to do with the weather. You saw early drops by both teams, and one team seemed to acclimate better than the other. And I have heard it just some people, they phoned it in. I don't want to believe it, but even when I'm reading now about the fact that it was a record low in terms of temperatures with wind chill, 9 degrees. And even the front office kind of melded in. They didn't clean off the seats. They didn't clean off the area where fans are sitting. And it is obviously mandated by the league that the stadium should be cleaned up and the snow should have been removed for those fans. It was not a good day for the Cincinnati Bengals in the front office or down on the field, Charlie.
It's just not a very good team. Like, it shouldn't be that surprising to see, Dylan Fairchild having rookie moments, or, Mitch Tinsley and Andre Yosevach struggling to make big plays down the field, or the tackling and anticipation on outside runs not being what you need it to. I mean, that's kind of been the story of the season. And while the cold was a different factor, a lot of the results that we saw, aside from a few plays from Burrow specifically that he'd want back, aside from those plays from Burrow, it was just stuff that we've been seeing all season. So cold or not cold, 0 degrees or 75 degrees and sunny, these were just some more examples of the 2025 Bengals.
And the reason why I bring it up, because I don't want to say they phoned it in, but last week, Joe Burrow made some statements, and he talked about the joy not being in the game. You can, however you want to play with words, because there are some people who want to try to change his meaning or try to overly interpret what he was saying. I think he was talking about his rehab and how hard it is to keep coming back from these injuries, and he did fight to make it back, right? But he fought to make it back so he could compete for what? For a chance to go to the playoffs and a chance to have these games be meaningful. It's hard, having played in this league, Charlie, I'll tell you, it's hard for players this time of year when you have to show up and give everything you got, from the soles of your feet to the top of your head, but when the games aren't meaningful, because you're no longer playing for something that's on the line. You're kind of playing out the string. And it's hard to do that. It's hard for players who are competitive. They want these games to be meaningful. And yeah, they're going to show up and they're going to try and they're going to play hard, but it just doesn't mean the same when you're eliminated or mathematically very much out of it. And I think that's what we saw in Sunday's game. I think we saw one team where there was a lot on the line and another team where there wasn't very much on the line?
While there might not technically be anything on the line for like Burrow or Chase, you look across this roster and you see a lot of guys competing for contracts and competing for jobs.
That's right.
The starting safeties, the starting linebackers, the starting defensive tackles. What are the Bengals going to do at those spots next season? The starting offensive guards, the depth receivers who had to step in bigger roles with T. Higgins out. What are the Bengals, plans on the depth chart for all those guys for next season are still very well things those guys are competing for. And then even some of their more prominent players, DJ Turner, Miles Murphy, Joseph Osai, they're competing for new contracts. So while there might be nothing on the line in terms of the season, these guys' careers are kind of at a pivot points, crux points. And for a lot of different reasons, they really can't afford to be handling games in the way you're talking about.
Yeah, look, I could remember, I think it was maybe 2017, 2018, right in there. Bengals were out of it. It was like, I think toward the last game of the season, or maybe that penultimate game, second to the last game. I'll never forget it. It was one of the most courageous games. This is why he remains one of my favorite all-time Bengals player. Because it was a game in the cold. It was freezing. So it was here in Cincinnati. And it was Giovanni Bernard. There was nothing to play for. And this guy gave us one of those games that you're like, wow. I mean, he had a great game and breaking tackles, running through defenders, dragging people. This is the smallest guy playing with the biggest heart. And I'll never forget it. It was an inspiring game, to be honest with you, that saw that team. And I think it was very next week, maybe when I think they go out to Baltimore, and that's when the Andy Dalton game, remember, they knocked the Baltimore Ravens from the playoffs because they won that game. Didn't have nothing to play for, Charlie. But I'm telling you, these were like moments and players who understood what it was about. And they end up doing some things that were very special. And I think those are players and those were games that Cincinnati Bengals fans will always remember.
And that's, I guess, what they're playing for right now. Similar window of an organization for a team that hasn't been in the playoffs for a few years and is trying to kind of reestablish and rebuild a core that they want to see get the team there. So who are those guys going to be, especially on defense? They traded one captain and another captain really hasn't played since week 6, with Logan Wilson and Trey Hendrickson. So there's been an opportunity for guys to at least have the chance to step up as leaders. If anyone really establishes themselves in that role, that's something that'll really carry forward ramifications for 2026. And it's something that, the performances over the next few weeks will be a part of the evaluation in those areas.
How did you take Joe Burrow's comments when he talked about not having fun, the joy, and why am I doing this if I'm not having fun? I'll go first because I don't think it's a trite comment. I think someone can easily dismiss what he was saying and say, it's your job. What do you mean fun? What do you mean you're supposed to have fun? That's probably what the lay person who's not an NFL player, former player, not in a competitive environment. What he meant by this is that it's still a game. And that at the end of the day, if you take the fun out of this, if it's not enjoyable, then you're not going to get the discretionary energy out of your players that you should be able to get. And that's discretionary energy is the energy that players individually give up at their own discretion, right? I'll show up. I'll do my job. You pay me to do a job. I'll do my job. And the level of energy is going to be here, Charlie. But if you, as a good leader, as a good organization, if we understand that how to really make this an all-inclusive, wonderful process, because you see coaches doing it around the league. That's what Dan Campbell does, right? That's what Mike Vrabel's doing in New England. They're actually having fun playing football in New England, by the way. So that's how you get that discretionary energy out of players. And that's what Joe is saying. The things that are not part of my job. Like if he could have sat the rest of the season out, hey, I'm going to be back next year. But no, this guy wants to be there. He's a competitor. And when you give up that, when you do that kind of work to make sure that you're part of this process and doing everything that you can to play, you want to look around and see that everybody else is doing everything that they can do to help us be successful. And he's talking about the entire process. He's not calling out teammates. I don't think he's calling out front office. I don't think he's calling out coaches, but he's saying that that's the kind of burning desire that everyone ought to have. And if everyone's bringing that to the table, then you're not going to find yourself 3 consecutive seasons of not going to the playoffs. And so I do think he's speaking to something much greater than himself, but while also holding himself accountable.
Yeah, I think he obviously has a whole different demeanor message if the Bengals are 10-4. And why are the Bengals 4-10 instead of 10-4? Well, it's the defense. And Burrow wasn't out there blaming the defense. But, one of the existential questions in sports is, does culture breed winning or does winning breed culture? And I think it goes a little bit of both ways. But, clearly if the Bengals were 10-4, they'd be in a very different mindset collectively right now. And they're not 10-4 because of all the games where the Bengals have scored 30+ points and the defense hasn't given enough winning caliber plays and has been historically one of the worst statistical defenses in the history of the league. So Burrow's not here blaming the defense, but the production of the defense is what has Burrow in the mindset that he's in with where this season is.
Just to give some facts to what you just said, Cincinnati Bengals have given up 30 or more points on defense for a league high 7 times this season. They're 1-6 in those ball games, Charlie. So I will say this, and look, I think people kind of watch all these shows and you listen to guys like you and I talk on podcasts and guys who played or guys who coach, and they're telling the public at large all the right things, that you don't call out your teammates. And I think anyone can look at Joe Burrow and say, wow, he's calling out his teammates. He's calling out his team. That's wrong to do. I'm going to say this too, because there's nuance to everything that you hear people say, right? There's rules and then there's unspoken rules. If you don't speak to a problem, Charlie, it doesn't get fixed. At some point, there is a time to hold people accountable, and there's a way of holding people accountable. But to sit back and just say, okay, it's okay because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, you and I both know that's not how you get things turned around when things are broken. There has to be some accountability. Now, I'll say this, you handle those things in-house, but they got to be called out. I've been on those teams where they get called out. And they get called out not in a nice way, but they get called out to the person in front of the rest of the team, because that's how the accountability gets handled. When your teammates are watching, they're seeing on the film the lack of effort, the lack of energy, the lack of focus, not carrying out assignments. They know it's been addressed several times. It's been discussed several times, and nothing improves. You got to do something about it. And so there does come a time where desperate times calls for desperate measures. And I'm not saying that you call those things out publicly. I think they ought to always be handled in-house. But something's got to be said. Silence does not get those problems fixed.
And then you look at Burrow, who post-game put the game on him. He addressed the team after the game and shared a very similar message, which, of course, this is one of the best players in the sport. The Bengals need more guys like Burrow. They need more of that standard. And I Bleav the stat is like 42 out of the 53 guys on the active roster have never played in the playoffs in a Bengals uniform. Wow. So things have changed so quickly that, the majority of these guys haven't been there before. And they probably do need to be brought along in that way to be ready for whenever they finally get to play on that stage, because of how long it's been since the Bengals have been there.
He did hold himself accountable, said that no team would have won the way that he played in the game on Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens. By the way, it is only the second time in his entire career, in 6 seasons now, where he's had no touchdowns and multiple interceptions. He's now thrown a pick 6 in back-to-back games, Charlie. to what can you point to why this is crescendoing into that direction where he's trying hard. He's giving it his best. There's no doubt about it. Why these moments are starting to creep into his game.
Well, the two pick sixes couldn't be any more different. The first was the Bengals are with the lead in 4-minute mode, trying to be very conservative and run out the clock. And they kind of, I don't want to say get fooled on a look, but they definitely get beat on a look with the check at the line of scrimmage with what they thought was a window for a screen. The other pick was the Bengals are down 17. They're in desperation mode, and the offensive line just makes a massive mistake. It wasn't anything that happened pre-snap, or it was something that happened pre-snap, but it wasn't anything that happened from a game planning perspective. It wasn't anything about, what Burrow's process was leading into the play. It was just they didn't pick up the defensive tackle based on the rules that they tried to execute at the line of scrimmage. So then Burrow has a defensive tackle in his face, and down 17, he just heaves up a prayer because the game's basically over anyway. So two extremely different pick sixes, both obviously very costly results. But certainly as a whole, the performance was full of moments yesterday where Burrow wasn't at the level he needs to be at.
I'm going to go ahead and say this because I think Joe Burrow is a man of his word. I think he really loves this game, and I think he is passionate about the game. And I do think there's a certain amount of emotional energy that he brings to his play, just like Tom Brady. You can hear him screaming, "Let's go." Tom Brady would get fired up. But I will say this. I think this offseason, there's going to be a lot of conversation as people, you know how it is. You throw pick six back-to-back weeks. It leaves you open to criticism. He's a big boy. He can handle it. But this offseason, I think we'd be remiss and not fully looking at the big picture. We wouldn't even be close to hitting the bullseye when it comes to identifying what needs to be addressed with this team. If you would allow yourself to say, Joe Burrow's got to stay healthy. I think if that's what you're saying to yourself, I think that's a low-hanging fruit. I think you're totally missing the point because, why he should stay healthy and it'd be great. I mean, we just saw Patrick Mahomes go down. That's not a skill. That's not like staying healthy isn't a skill. It's not a quote talent. You play in the NFL, it's a 100% injury risk. But I can sit here and tell you, do you know that Joe Burrow, up until this year, he's played in 10 or more games every single season. Every single season. He missed, 7 games in 2023. He missed 9 games so far this year. But he's played in 10 or more games every year up until this year. He's probably, if he starts the rest of the games, he's going to play in 7 this year. That's not the reason why they've struggled. They've had good offense even in games this year, right? When he was out. So the production at the quarterback position has existed even in his absence in 2023 when Jake Browning did play well. And even this season when Joe Flacco did play well. So to focus on, and let's face it, they're not the same team without Joe Burrow. I know that. But they're getting production at the quarterback position on a regular basis. Again, 7 games this season, Charlie, where they scored 30 or more points. But they're 1-6 in those games. So if you're going to go into this diatribe this offseason and say, well, Joe Burrow's just got to stay healthy, you're just not paying attention.
It's the defense. It keeps going back to a defense where they didn't upgrade at safety during the offseason. They made this all-in bet with 2 rookie linebackers, and the linebacker play has probably been the weakest position group on the defense. It's a team that didn't add any interior pass rush. It's a team whose biggest investment was Shamar Stewart, who basically has had a lost rookie season with 0 production so far. And a defense who, their 3 best players entering the year, I thought, were going to be Trey Hendrickson, who really hasn't played since week 6, aside from half of a game, were Logan Wilson, who got benched in week 6, and were Cam Taylor-Britt, who had a tough year and then had a season-ending injury. So put all that together, and it's a unit that just wasn't, or that just was always tough to rely on. And it's a unit that time and time again, when it had to make a play, failed to, because what the Bengals Bleav would be their answers at basically every position just didn't work in 2025.
Very interesting. This offseason, there's some front office conversation that's need to be had here too. And we're going to do an autopsy as we get closer to the end of the season. Maybe we're already there, Charlie. But there's going to have to be an autopsy here that's going to suggest that there's a lot that could have been done better this offseason. That Cincinnati Bengals fans were led to believe that just bringing back T. Higgins and Jamar Chase was, quote, enough. And just to be fair, I do think the signing of a T.J. Slaton should be commended. I do think that was a good signing. I think that's one, maybe one slither of a bright spot that you can look to and say, okay, they didn't swing and miss with that signing. Am I wrong?
He's been fine. The run defense up the middle has been solid. It's when teams go on the edges and on the outside and challenge the Bengals in space outside of the tackles that they really struggle. But yeah, Slayton's been fine, and they certainly identified nose tackle as a pressing need that they've addressed with multiple investments in free agency in the draft over the last couple seasons. And Slayton has done his job for the most part and is just about a fine value for what they're paying him.
Well, okay. I didn't see fireworks going off there, Charlie, but I will take it because I think you would say if it was a stock, it's trading even right now. So I'll take it. Cincinnati Bengals have the Miami Dolphins coming up, and at this time of this taping, the Dolphins have won 4 straight games, and they have rushed for over 100 yards in 8 of their 11 games this season. And I'm talking in spectacular fashion. Devon Achane is creasing teams. This is a coaching staff that many people thought was DOA, dead on arrival, but they seem to have resurrected their ability to play football. They're getting through to this team. They are actually, at the time of this recording, in playoff contention. How do you think we'll do when we head south? Maybe the Bengals should go early down there and hang out in the South Florida sun before taking on the Miami Dolphins week 16.
Well, the Bengals, like I just mentioned, their struggles with outside runs, and that's been the Dolphins' bread and butter.
Right.
So kind of a strength against weakness where they'll have to make some real strong corrections and adjustments to take away kind of the basis and the foundation, and really one of the only strengths I see in Miami's offense, and that'll be a real test for the linebackers, for the safeties, for the edges being strong and physical as they set the point of attack on the line of scrimmage. And even if there's nothing to play for, it'll still be a really good test to see if there's much development and improvement going on along this defense.
You know, whenever that comes up, I wasn't on many teams that had nothing, quote, nothing to play for going into the last game of the season. I think it only happened one time. And that was my rookie season here during the strike year. I don't know where you were at in 87, Charlie, but something
I don't have much.
Something. But yeah, it was a strike year. There was these scab guys that came in, played a few games and couldn't win any, and we had to carry that record. But we lost enough games on our own, by the way, where we had leads and squandered them. So I have been part of that scenario. But there's this thing called the love of the game. And you got to find it. You got to dig deep to find it in situations like this. And that's what I'm going to be looking for as I watch the Bengals play out these final 3 games to close out the season. What are you looking for as they look to close it out in the final 3?
Yeah, I'd like to see, 2 guys solidify themselves as starters on the 2026 Bengals. We all know Jamar and T will be starters, but like 2 guys not in that camp, even take out like a Miles Murphy and DJ Turner, 2 other guys who haven't quite popped yet, showing enough to where you can really write their name in with enough confidence and with enough progress, and just see the development and the recognition and the football IQ and the maturity continue to grow with those guys. That's all going to be really important. And those are things the Bengals will be closely watching.
Did you like the sack by Miles Murphy yesterday, the pass rush move?
he's finishing. He's really finishing, and he's doing a solid job, not just showing his traits, but finding that extra gear to complete the play.
I'm going to say this. I'm not taking anything away from him. Don't put me in the hater category because I do like Miles Murphy. He was going up against the tight end, Charlie. The tight end was dropping back.
That's right.
He wasn't pass rushing against a tackle. He ought to win that one every single time, 100%.
You're right. You're right. But credit to Al Golden for generating that type of position and opportunity for Miles.
All right. I'll take it. Good pass rush. Got the sack. Made a play. Speaking of making plays, we appreciate you stopping by to join us. You're always making plays on this show, Charlie. We appreciate you. We want to thank everyone for joining us right here on the Bleav in Bengals podcast presented by FanDuel. Don't forget to join us next time, everyone.